Want to know what's left after today's bans and the incoming standard rotation? These 3 standard decks will be surviving into next year. I'm Sam, welcome to MTG Bazaar. Our first deck that's going to survive the rotation and doesn't actually get affected much by the bans is this Roots deck by Chuan Sun, who came 6th at Chiba's Spotlight Series for Final Fantasy. The main card that we need to replace in this deck, looking towards rotation, is Haywire Might in terms of spells, but we also need to replace some of the lands as well. So in the new year, we're going to have the Blooming Marsh cycle, so the enemy cycle of lands stay in standard. So luckily for this deck, that doesn't even go. However, Llanowar Wastes will rotate out. There are also a couple of cards that we have in the sideboard that are going to have to go as well. 2 copies of Go for the Throat and 1 Voldaren Thrillseeker. Thrillseeker is probably the biggest loss for the deck in terms of utility because there's no effect to really replace it. As far as going into next year is concerned, this deck really has what it takes to survive. This is how we've altered the deck going into next year's standard. So 4 Haywire Might go out, and then we also get to add 2 Llanowar Elves in, as well as 2 Town Greeters. Of course, we have another set all to go before this, so maybe there'll be some other great utility 1-drop to put into the deck over the Haywire Might slot, but that's a pretty clean change here. And while we're losing some utility in the answers that we have for things like impending overlords and, let's say, Proph's Eidetic Memory, at the same time, having to answer artifacts and enchantments on board is actually going to be less of a requirement going into next year due to the rotation of things like Leyline Binding and obviously the ban at Cory Steelcutter and Up the Beanstalk. So looking very good for Roots in this new meta. It basically loses nothing. So we get to more double down on our own game plan in the main, and then that'll open up some utility for us going into the sideboard games and allowing us to look at maybe some alternate threats in the sideboard. We haven't added them in yet, but if this deck starts to get hated out, let's say by Soul Guide Lantern or something like that, maybe Ghost Vacuum, then we can have a look at incorporating some of those alternate threats into our sideboard. Speaking of the sideboard, we lost a couple of copies of Go for the Throat, which are easily replaced by Shoot the Sheriff, and then the other 2 cards which are rotating out are going to be replaced by Scrap Shooter. Scrap Shooter is an incredibly powerful anti-enchantment and artifact card, and in this case, because we're losing the Haywire Mites from the main deck, I wanted to double down on that effect in the sideboard instead. If you want to play this deck immediately, you just don't need to change over the Overgrown Tombs or the Haywire Mites. Basically, this got nothing banned, so the existing deck list can work well for you if you want to stay with them for the remaining couple of weeks of Standard. However, if you're going into next year, look for those Overgrown Tombs, combine them with things like your Great Arashin Cities and your Wastewood Verges, and just feel really stoked that your deck just got a lot better. One of the big winners of the Standard bans is Red-Green Delirium. Thankfully for Red-Green Delirium, they don't need to actually lose basically any cards. The only card that got banned from this deck was the occasional one of Monstrous Rage. Otherwise, every card stayed in this deck, and as a deck that could already race things like Mice and Cutter, I think it becomes an incredibly powerful option for setting the pace of the format going forward. This deck by Megazone23, which I'm sure is probably not their legal name, but it's a very cool one, came 50th at Chiba on the weekend. And it gives us a look at some of the different builds of Delirium. If you want to see more on builds of Delirium, this archetype is a favorite of mine. Look back in the channel's history. I've got a couple of videos on it, including the list that I took to a top 4 at the RC. So what I would advise with this deck is essentially prepare for rotation. You're going to change over some lands. Copperline Gorge does rotate out as it's one of the friendly cycle of fast lands. And Karplusan Forest also goes, but there are some easy replacements for those. Additionally, we're losing Wrenn and Realmbreaker, but Wrenn and Realmbreaker was one of the very only occasionally included 3-drops in the deck, and there's still 3 really powerful ones to replace it with. So let's have a look at that. This is our updated Delirium deck list. Now, this deck still has 61 cards in the main, which is not something I would usually advise. However, I decided to stick with the existing structure of the deck that did the best at Chiba. So let's have a look at this and the changes that we've made. Obviously, Wrenn and Realmbreaker is rotating out, so we replace that with Terra Magical Adept. Given that we have 4 Summon Brynhilda in this list anyway, I think there's a lot of synergy to be made there, and I think that's going to pay us off in some certain ways, including all the self-mill that it will allow us. Additionally, we are losing Seed of Hope from this deck, so we've replaced it with a mix of spells. I have 2 Rubblebelt Maverick, a card that you've just seen in the Roots deck, and it's a very successful card in the format. Allows us a little bit of self-mill, but we don't want too many of them, so just 2 of those. The additional card that we've added to the deck is Torch the Tower. So Torch the Tower is a card that's in and out of this deck at times. One of the good things about Torch the Tower is it offers you the opportunity to sacrifice one of your permanents in addition to paying its cost. So the ability to use Torch the Tower to get an additional type or 2 types of something like an enchantment or artifact creature into the bin is going to offer you the chance to turn on Delirium a little bit more consistently. And while we're on this Omnivorous Flytrap and Beastie Beatdown build of the deck, that's kind of required. Now, I always like overprotect in the main deck here, but that's okay. That's something that we can talk about later on when it comes to the different builds of Delirium. Looking at the sideboard, we only lose 1 card from this, which is the Filigree Silex, which will rotate out of Standard. Now, the Filigree Silex was only really ever included in the first place due to the meta, and a lot of the decks that it was targeting have just been hit quite heavily by the bans. So we'll have to see if that's actually a loss to the deck at all, or something that we would have taken out anyway. We've added to the sideboard an additional copy of Outpace Oblivion. Outpace Oblivion is very strong with Terror, and offers us a removal spell that's also something that we can find off our 3-drop. This sideboard remains a really strong combination of spells that answer a wide range of threats, and we can alter this as we go forward to, deal with what's in the meta. All the card access that we have in red and green is really powerful for sideboards, which is unusual. That's not normally the case in Standard, but it is the case in this one, and it will be the case in the next one. So having a look at this sideboard, there are a lot of different ways we can build this deck and take it into an evolving meta. This blue-black tempo deck by Kenta Muscato from the Chiba Spotlight series, almost said Grand Prix, not Grand Prix, it's a Spotlight series, came 5th overall, so very good performance there by Kenta. This list is something that really does well from both rotation and the bans. One of the few tier 1 archetypes not targeted at all, along with the other 2 that we've just seen in this video, and something that also has very few cards that are actually rotating out at the same time. We're losing some things from the deck. We're losing Cut Down and Go for the Throat, although there are good replacements for those, and we're losing some of the mana base as well. So Darkslick Shores is rotating out, as is Underground River. We've got replacements for those incoming though, and we'll talk about that when we get to our updated list. The sideboard also has some changes in it, particularly cards like Shieldred, which is finally rotating out of Standard. I know some people have been wanting that to happen for a while, along with the extra copy of Cut Down. Have pretty equivalent replacements. Blue-black has the tools to keep going into the new Standard meta, so let's look at an updated version. This is our updated blue-black tempo list, and the changes in this list are pretty clean. So what we have is we have 3 Cut Down out and 3 Go for the Throat out for 4 Shoot the Sheriff and 2 Disfigures. We have fewer 1-drop removal spots, but at the same time, with the changes to the format, they're going to be less necessary going forward. So 2 Disfigures there over the Cut Downs. The other big change to this deck is in the mana base. So 4 Starting Town come in, as well as 4 Watery Grave to replace the existing Darkslick Shores and Underground Rivers. We still have that combination of come into play tapped lands as well as pain lands in here. They're just on the same card, but we're going to lose a little bit more life from our Watery Graves. I just think we can afford to do it as the meta slows down a little bit. Looking at the sideboard here, we've replaced Shieldred with an Oil Deep Gearhulk. The card has lifelink and it disrupts our opponent's hand, so it does fill those dual purposes that Shieldred did of being able to disrupt slower decks or become a clock against slower decks. So good in those matchups, as well as being a life gain threat against the faster decks. Not quite as good as Shieldred, but very few things are. Additionally, we had to replace another Cut Down in the sideboard with a Disfigure, so we're up to 4 Disfigure total, and unless we get another card in Edge of Eternity to replace that slot, I think Disfigure will be what we will be looking at for the black decks going forward. It's a very good card, and I think it'll be doing enough. So there you have it, 3 decks that survive rotation and benefit a lot from the bans. So I hope you liked them. If you got any use out of this video, remember to subscribe and like the video, and drop in the comments if you think there is an archetype that you would really like to see explored with the bans. I've been Sam. Thanks for joining us. See you again next time.